bit of feedback on the line. Sorry, I'm just going to. That's it. No, thanks. It's 1 minute past 12. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Connect Monday Revenues and Benefit Monday workshop. Unfortunately, Malcolm's not going to be able to join us today. He's come down with flu-like or COVID-like symptoms over the weekend, so we wish him speedy recovery. And hopefully we'll be chatting to him soon. So if I start off the revenues workshop today, and a bit of an introduction. Today, I'm not sure if Liz has joined us yet, and we think that Naomi is possibly not going to join us yet this afternoon, but we have Kevin Stewart here to talk about business rates. Nick will be marshalling all the troops, making sure we don't miss any questions. We have a piece to discuss from Gareth on modelling of some of the recent changes that have been announced. And hopefully Laura will be joining us for lively discussion as well. So without much ado, I'll get on. First on our agenda is we've got Kim Larkin from LA Directories on with a proposed supported accommodation workshop. Kim, if it's okay, I'd like to hand over to you so you can let everybody know what you're proposing.
Thank you, Jake. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon as it is now. Some of you may remember from a couple of weeks ago the exempt accommodation topic cropped up, and I asked a question about how many of you are experiencing care homes deregistering and becoming supported accommodation. But there's also lots of other problems that are arising in the last couple of years in connection with exempt accommodation. And the different types of arrangements that are springing up between property owners, landlords and care providers. So I'm arranging the equivalent of a one-day workshop during week beginning the 10th of January. And Team NetSol have kindly offered to run the technical support for us over the period of these workshops. And what I want to know from you here today is whether or not you would prefer 2 mornings, so 2 sessions of 2.5 hours with a break in the middle, or over 4 mornings, which are 1.25 hour sessions each. And on each of those days, we would have a different topic within the area of exempt accommodation with a different speaker. Because Malcolm's not here today, we can't run the poll because he's the meeting organizer. So Jake has suggested that we ask you to raise your hands if you would prefer so one option or the other. So I think we'll just go for those that would prefer 2 mornings, i.e. 2 sessions, 2 longer sessions, to raise their hands now, if you can.
Oh, we're getting hands. I suppose that's the. It'd be 2 days, one after the other as well, wouldn't it, Kim? So
it would be, yes. I'm thinking it would be a Tuesday and a Wednesday, or a Wednesday and a Thursday. So avoiding Mondays and Fridays, the 2 days that people don't like to attend training. Well, it's not training actually, but it's free to attend. There's no charge. LA Directories will be facilitating this workshop for everybody to come together and to discuss their issues and to ask questions. So it's not actually a training session, it's getting an insight into what's going on. Because it's free to attend, and I'm expecting quite a high take up for that reason, I do have to give priority to members of the Benefits Directory, which I think is for obvious reasons, but I am limiting attendance to, initially at least, to 1 person per local authority. and I'm intending to send out registration or details of how to register for this event next week once we've got the actual dates pinned down. I've already got some agreements in principle from some people to speak at this event, and I think it will be quite interesting.
Quite a few hands went up. At one point it was just over 50%. I think we got up to sort of 16, 17 out of 30. So although it's quite close, I think that there's a slight preference on this call anyway for people to do the 2 mornings. So
yeah, I've had some feedback from members of the benefits directory this morning, and that so far is heavily leans towards the 2 mornings.
Yeah, excellent. So I think that gives us our answer, and we'll have to hope we've got enough servers in the background to run what's obviously going to be quite a crowded session. Hopefully.
Well, I will be discussing with Malcolm what the limit will be on numbers. And if this is very successful, then we will look at perhaps running it again for those that are not able to attend. But we'll see how the first one goes, and then look at further dates if it's felt necessary.
Yeah, and I guess as well, if there are some people that literally can't get the time off, we could even offer to record it and make it available.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
That would be good.
Yeah, because it will be, as Kim says, it's more of a discussion. It's not like a presentation on.
I will just be carrying out introductions, allowing people to come in to speak and questions to be asked. I'll be chairing the questions, and then afterwards we will do some sort of summary report on what came out of that day.
So quite interesting, something to look forward to in the new year, to blow away the Christmas blues, or booze rather.
Yes, well, thanks everybody that took the time to put their hands up there, and I hope many of you are able to attend at the time. So thank you very much, and thank you, Jake, for allowing me to speak about that.
No problem. I look forward to coming along myself. I mean, it's
definitely
such a complicated subject, and it's being involved in actually sort of analysing the benefits rules. It's one of those areas that's so up in the air. And I'm sure different authorities have all sorts of different feedback on how they are or aren't coping with the changes in exempt accommodation.
Oh yes, it's very mixed. Yeah, absolutely. So thanks everyone.
Brilliant. So I'll move on to our next slide. We have Kevin with us to discuss council tax and business rates. Kevin on the side of the building. So the question is simple to you, Kevin. What will the business rate changes actually mean? I can see you've posted in the conversation a link for us all to click on if we want.
Thank you so much. Lunch, Lurch, or whatever has replaced the MHCLG, I still can't get my head round, but don't forget I'm old. Have issued a business rates information letter that I think did come out after last week's meeting, but if it didn't, I apologise for that. It has given some clues as to what is coming. Now, the government are planning a tax day in late November when they're going to announce all the guidance for these various new reliefs, etc. I went through them last week. I have been asked to do some written notes on it, and I am pulling that together, but hopefully that won't be much longer now, and I'll do that through Team Netzel. Now, if you look at the guidance, ERD mentioned retail relief at pre-COVID levels. So anyone who knows their pre-COVID retail relief scheme will know that had an RV limit. The new ERD scheme does not have an RV limit, actually has the cash cap limit of 110,000. So basically the 110,000 up to the that amount is valid, and that's anywhere in England is valid for that. Nursery discount will go. Obviously, we'll get the full guidance on all those reliefs and what the impact of that is. We're still getting a lot of businesses that haven't applied for ERD, expanded retail discount, this year, and that is having an impact upon our collection rates. As we actually enforce the debt, we are finding more come out of the woodwork. There are some further schemes, including rate avoidance and empty rates, that are being under review. And of course, there is the review of the central list, because more and more properties appear to be going on the central list. So that is interesting in respect of financing. And obviously, we've got the revaluation next year, which is going to be interesting because rateable values, I'm assuming, will come down. But if you've got to raise the same level of business rates, that's going to be fascinating. Please note the multiplier has frozen for this next financial year. So it's going to be very interesting times. As I said, 50% for that. The other reliefs that are under consultation, the government aren't proposing any changes to them, so they're still as complex as ever. And the revaluation coming up in the wings is making it all very, very interesting in terms. Keep a lookout for tax day. You'll get the guidance to operate these various relief schemes. If I do get wind of it, I will let everyone know what day that is. And I don't think they've announced the tax day yet, but apparently they're going to do like they did in March when they announced a whole range of measures, or the consultations. They announced the draft information on them, or the full information on that. Still quiet on council tax, adult social care. There wasn't much in the budget on council tax, so don't know what that's going to happen. On business rates itself, we've got the COVID MCC appeal relief. That's got its second reading on Wednesday. The committee stage reading on the 10th of November. I'm still anticipating a royal assent either late November, early December, because that's really whittling its way through now. Please note, you've then got to go and set a discretionary scheme. You might have to go to consultation, and you won't find out until royal assent how much money you've got to spend. So how you draft a scheme quickly remains to be seen, and you'll probably need member approval as well. On the grants, there's still some authorities waiting still to do the reconciliations from the first way round. We've handed all ours in. I'm fairly confident we're virtually there with all our reconciliations by ARG, but BIS will probably tell me differently. And of course, we're doing post assurance now. We are testing it out through our system here at Mid Sussex. However, I'm still waiting for them to sign off that letter so we can test our system out. And that's about 10 days after they said they'd send me the letter. So grants hasn't gone away just yet. There's a lot of admin work to do behind the scenes, and that will be ongoing the next few years. So certainly business rates will be around, I think, for some time to go. You've got HMRC looking at digitalised billing. Trust me, they ain't got a clue. Because one of the authorities they've come to is Mid Sussex, and every time they send somebody else and they start ask the same questions, or rather naive questions from before. So I think it'll be around for a little while yet. We've got business rates now. So for anyone looking for the future in whatever they want to do, I think you've got a bit of time before business rates goes out the door. Happy to take questions or anything else. And if anyone's got any queries outside of this meeting, I'll leave my email address and you can contact me. Hope it's all right there.
I have one quick question about business rates. Has there been any word on what's happening in devolved nations? They're just going to have to, they're going to be similar.
They have, in fact, for 21-22, I think Scotland's given 100% expanded retail discount. I don't know what they're planning, because you've got to remember we've announced very early this time, because generally we announce it in early March, which impacts upon your billing process. So I don't think, I could be wrong, so please tell me, I don't think announcements have yet been made in Scotland and Wales.
And then the other thing that struck me was you've saying, it just reminds me of when council tax is concerned, the whole local council tax support rollout. It just gives me the fear when you say that.
For those of you that have had additional council tax support funding this year, there will not be that scheme. I know a lot of authorities have had new hardship schemes this year that they've done with funding with the county scheme, for example, with the county putting money towards a hardship sort of fund. We've definitely been told that will not happen next year. So that additional funding that was given towards council tax support, and we'll notice the funding is drying up in terms, okay, the financial settlement might be different. There might be localism to that agenda for council tax that you'll have to consider. But there is no additional funding for council tax support. And I'd suggest that with the government funding drying up, job furlough scheme finishing, grants finishing, I suspect there's an awful lot of water to go into the bridge yet on the impact on debts, benefits, and any ancillary help as well.
And there's not going to be a lot of time to run any sort of consultations. If, you know.
I think if you haven't started your process now, forget it, because you've got to go to consultation, you've got to do it for 8 to 12 weeks, you've got to get member approval, and you've got to do it by the 11th of March. That isn't long. So you're then starting towards the following year. You really need to start it, in my view, May, June, July. Possibly can get away with it in September as we did it previously. But you've really got to start it fairly early, I'd suggest, to get through. You don't want to be caught foul of your consultation procedures in your authority.
Interesting. Any questions from our illustrious audience? I mean, it seems to me like what we really need is a fundamental review of business rates.
I think we've just had a fundamental review that was a bit of a damp squib, can I say, at the end of that.
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of problems building up, little knots in the system that we've all been aware of for many, many years. And then
I think they're just trying to add on to a system that's already complex and just making it even more complex, because I think benefits has always been technical. I get that. And I'm not saying council tax and business rates is easy, but I think business rates particularly has got more technical as they've engineered more and more reliefs, which really tells you, it asks you the question whether the system is fit for purpose.
Yeah, I'm sure there's much appetite to.
But what can they do in its replacement? And that came out of the fundamental review. There's not much they can do.
No.
So if there's something there to replace it, but I can't see there is. And as I said, the HMRC have not instilled me with confidence they know about the system enough to be able to do it. And what actually happened on the business grants and the administration of business grants, yes, it was huge work, but the local knowledge was such a help in them actually doing that scheme.
Yeah, always is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Kevin. As Kevin said, if anybody's got any questions they think of after reading the documents, feel free to send them through. We can always address specifics at later meetings, or Kevin to do us a white paper move. But I shall move on the slideshow. Thanks for that, Kevin. We've now got the benefits of the future, but benefits of the future. Gareth would like to, as mentioned last week, would like to discuss the modelling that he's been doing over some of the recent changes. So, Gareth, if you'd like to request control.
Okay, can I just share my content from here? I think, does that work? Is that there now?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, and you can hear me. Okay, right.
Yeah.
Very, very preliminary look at what the changes mean from the budget announcement bits there. Just to summarise what we know about universal credit changes, the taper for the earnings has been reduced, so it's down to 55% from the 63%. That's actually the original planned rate that was in the universal credit original white paper, was a 55% deduction, which was expected to give more incentive for work. It was introduction, of course, later as a 65% deduction, which rather reduced that incentive. The other thing which has changed is the work allowances increased by £500 a year, but for both the high and the low work allowance rates, but nothing reintroduced for anybody who doesn't have children or a limited capability for work. That was removed some years ago. So there's still no work allowance for single people or people without that kind of disability. Nothing for those people who aren't working. This is absolutely focused on people who have earnings, and nothing, of course, at all either for people on the legacy benefits, including the recipients still of working tax credits. So again, it's pushing what incentives there are onto universal credit, with the expectation and hope, I'm sure, of trying to move more people voluntarily onto universal credit from the legacy benefits. If we look at the straightforward net earnings figure as we currently have them for people who aren't on benefits, as I'm sure you'll be kind of well aware of, as you go through, and these are week by week on national living wage, hour by hour at national living wage level earnings. You don't start, if you're in work, seeing any deductions at all until way up in the 25 hours a week work, when national insurance initially kicks in and then tax kicks in later. So that's the kind of deduction rate we're seeing at the very top end there for people who aren't on benefits. If you are receiving universal credit, however, the figures look very different. And you can see where the deduction rates kick in and the much reduced amount of income that you get net pay after taking into account the tax and the NI and the tapering of universal credit. Now, where you have no work allowance, that taper that will be 55% shown in the chart here kicks in immediately from hour one, and you can see the effect therefore that has of initially just the taper and then later on national insurance tax coming in as well. Huge difference between the gross earnings and the net. When you've got the work allowances coming in, you can see that the gap before the taper applies really has quite a big effect here. So you're seeing for somebody on the lower work allowances that they don't see any deductions from their gross earnings until now it's going to be up in the kind of the 9 hours national living wage earnings a week. And if you're on the higher work allowances where there are no housing costs being paid by support, you're up now to the sort of the 14.5 hours area there before you start seeing those deductions kicking in. So you can see the big difference over the whole of the earnings range between people getting no work allowances and people getting the lower and the higher work allowances. But all, of course, still very much being much larger than you would be seeing from people who are not on benefits and just looking at tax and national insurance as their deductions. If we look at the marginal deduction rate, the total amount of deduction that applies to you, increasing as your hours of work increase, again, you can see the huge difference between somebody who's not on benefits and whose marginal deduction rate basically stays at naught until they're past 21 hours of national living wage level earnings, when national insurance kicks in, and then up a bit further to where tax kicks in. That looks like a nice low marginal deduction rate when you compare it with somebody who's got no work allowances and is seeing that now 55% reduction kicking in from penny one and gradually increasing when you get up to the national insurance and tax levels there again. Once more, you can see the way in which the work allowances have a really big effect on people who qualify for them. Zero deduction for those people on the low rate until their work allowance is used up, and then you can see the way in which the margin deduction gradually increases for them, and a higher amount still for people on the higher work allowances. So what's clear is for people on benefits or not on benefits, it's obviously that the more you earn, the higher your deductions are going to be in terms of the marginal deduction rates. But they're not even. This group chart makes it look more or less even because there are nice, smooth, gradual increases as your hours increase. If you were to look at what happens on an hour-by-hour basis, so we're talking about the marginal deduction rate at each hour as you go through, again for national living wage, you can see the bottom line here, which is zero for somebody who has earnings, no deductions at all. Then once national insurance kicks in, for each hour at that rate, you're coming in at about 12% deduction rate. Then when the tax kicks in again, that takes you up to something just over the 30% deduction rate. For each hour, you get a different kind of marginal deduction rate. So people who are thinking about working an extra 2 or 3 hours a week will get a very different return if those 2 or 3 hours a week are down the bottom end of the hours in total, and at the if they were at the top end of the hours in total. With the no work allowance figure, you can see that that kicks off again at the 55% and then just has its jink up to national insurance and its jink up to tax. Slightly mitigated. It's not a bigger jump as you get with the gross earnings, because of course the effect of the net earnings is to change your benefit entitlement bit as well. So there's a bit of buffering there. If you're on the low earnings, the low work allowance figure, gain nothing at all between say 5 and 7 hours, but between 7 and 9 hours, you suddenly jump up to 55% of each hour's earning being reduced. The same for the high work allowances, nothing up till 13 or 14 hours. And then suddenly you jump up again to the 55% of each extra hour being taken off you, going up a little bit again as national insurance kicks in, and going up to 70% of everything that you earn being taken off you at the higher end. If we look specifically at the difference now between the previous to December, the current rate, if you like, and the rate that will kick in December, where do the gains begin to appear? Well, if you've got no work allowances, you gain from, again, penny number one, because you're only paying a 55% deduction rate rather than a 63% deduction rate. So you can see the comparison of the earnings you get to keep post December being higher than obviously the ones that you would have had up until that date. And this takes account again of tax and NI at these kind of levels, which actually steepens the differential. So somebody with no work allowances is going to be gaining straight away compared to somebody in the same circumstances this month. If you're on a low work allowance figure, I'm sorry, the graph looks not quite as clear, a little bit different, because you're not paying any deductions at the moment up until about 7 hours. You don't gain anything from these changes until you're working longer than 7 hours. Then you get a little bit of a jink because of the increased work allowance. And then you get this difference in terms of the taper, showing you a real kind of gradually increasing increase. But it's important to pick up on that bit that if you happen to be on a low work allowance, somebody's paying rent very typically, you're not going to gain anything for the first 7 hours. So there's no giveaway at all for people who are working very few hours and getting a work allowance. That's exaggerated then for people on the high work allowance, so that's with no housing support, typically homeowners, people with mortgages, those people that are living at home with their parents. No gain at all until you start working more than 13 hours then for people on the high work allowance. Then a little bit of a jink as the extra work allowance kicks in, and then you're just on this 55% versus 63% reduction. So in summary, I guess you'd say that the effects are there's some more entitlement to UC at the higher earnings end, but no gain at all for the poorest, skewed very much to trying to encourage people to work more hours and to earn more, I suspect. Now, whether the increase in UC claims, because people who aren't currently entitled at the higher end of the earnings figures may become entitled under the new rules, whether that will mean more CTR or not, I have no idea. I suspect there will be a temptation for some people to move from HB to UC, though, because no gain on the legacy benefit side of things, where they may be getting working tax credit, but an apparent temptation to move to UC, certainly if they're working and earning more than that kind of equivalent of 13 hours national living wage. Just one final little slide I've been doing a little bit digging out with is that once again the Chancellor has put up national living wage next year and said this could mean £1,000 a year for the lowest paid workers. What a huge gain it is. But the reality, of course, is that gross increase, £20 odd a week, doesn't convert into a real increase. If you're earning below the tax and national insurance threshold, then again, if you're on universal credit, you're going to see 55% of that taken off you. So that'll leave you with £9 a week, coming up to the £500 rather than the £1,000 giveaway. And the giveaway, remember, is also being paid by an employer, not by the government. Coming in with national insurance, so earning between the tax and NI thresholds, and the higher national insurance, remember, next year with that 1.5% social care levy coming in, will mean that after that deduction kicks in, you're down to gaining £8 of the 20-odd pound. And once you're in the taxable area of income, well, you're down to £6 of the 20-odd pound, about 30% of what the government makes the employer give you goes to the employee. The rest of it, plus the employer's higher national insurance as well, goes straight to government. So I have to say, I think the national living wage change is much more aimed at being revenue generating for government than it is at being benefit generating for the worker. That's my little bit. So I'll stop there and happy to comment or answer any points on that.
Anybody on the panel like to comment on those figures? One thing that struck me, that you mentioned towards the end of CTR, I wonder how, if you're getting a between 500 and £1,000 change in annual income, would this affect people on banded CTR schemes? And if it sort of rolls into what you're saying about being revenue generated for government, is actually going to be something that possibly drags on admin budgets for LAs if they're having to sort of recalculate these new, even just a regular CTR scheme where it's affected by your income. It's going to cause all sorts of extra administrative headaches.
Well, there are all sorts of knock-ons. I haven't yet managed to start looking at the way in which UC income is treated differently for CTR schemes across England. So, again, but many local authorities treat that quite differently, and so the consequential effects of that may be very different as well.
I can see Lynn, you've got your hand raised. If you've got some comment, please feel free.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Gareth, I think you made a good point about people maybe seeing it as an incentive to move from housing benefit to UC. But are the DWP putting anything out about the incentive in quotation marks?
No, not specifically. I mean, the DWP and the government are putting things out saying this is a hugely generous government giveaway to the poorest workers, and it's a hugely generous government giveaway through national living wage increase for the poorest workers next year. How people interpret that and whether they understand the real underpinning effect rather than the presentational effect, I think is, as always, open to question.
I mean, my experience is that, quite a lot of officers struggle with tapers. So, somebody claiming benefit, would they understand the difference between 55% and 63% without specifically being told how it would affect them?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. They won't. And the point I was trying to make about the hour-by-hour difference is that it's much more complicated than that. You can't say to somebody, because we're reducing the taper for 55% from 63%, that you're going to be better off in many ways working when the hour-by-hour taper differences are actually very substantially different from 12 hours to 13 hours and 13 hours to 14 hours. You can't kind of make the assumption that I expect most people probably would do, that you're going to gain more or less the same amount for each extra hour you work.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah, I think that struck me as well, be very stark, especially if you're on universal credit, because you know that your benefits being recalculated month on month. How long is it going to take somebody to work out that if they work 13 hours a week, they get X amount of money, but that 1 week where they did 16 hours, they were actually quite disappointed with the extra uplift they got for the extra hours they did, unless that's, like you said, Lynn, how do you explain that to people?
Mm.
You know, you see these figures banded about £20 a week. And then you see, you know, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation going, well, actually, you know, your politicians say, well, you get an extra X amount per hour. But the analysis actually turns out there's a lot less than that over the years. Your figures demonstrated quite keenly.
But obviously they want the universal credit count to go up. That's always been the ambition. So it sort of seems as though this might be, as I said, the driver maybe to get the universal credit figures up.
Yeah, I mean, the more people you get to voluntarily move on to UC, the less you're going to have to pay transitional protection to when you actually move people on in that kind of managed migration process. And again, one of the things that came out of the budget statement was that this 2024 date for completing managed migration now, which is a lot closer, I think, than most people thought was likely. And I have to say that I think they'd be very, very hard pushed to achieve that date anyway.
Thank you both.
Do we have any more comments from the audience? Zoe, I can see you raised your hand. Please do join. Feel free.
Hi, yeah, I could never leave the interaction of universal credit and CTR go without commenting. I have to say, those are some of the most interesting slides I've seen in a long time. Absolutely love them. I spent ages looking at them. Really, really loved them from Gareth. Yeah, the first thing is that the demographics of those remaining on legacy benefits are very different than those that have moved over to universal credit, and they are the group who are unlikely to claim council tax, all not qualify. So I don't expect there's going to be a like for like as they move over. There is also a big drop off as people move over to universal credit. People who have claimed council tax reduction for years under housing benefit. In all councils, nearly all councils, we see a drop off as they move to universal credit. So there might actually be a saving for the local authorities. They're not so great for the residents, but there's various reasons behind it. And we did I was involved in a report for the Welsh Government looking at this across Wales. And it wasn't absolutely clear why people were, I think it's that engagement with the local authority, it breaks that link with the local authority, but there is that drop off. So any sort of assessment of this move as people move over to universal credit and the impact on CTR has to take into account that drop off. And also, of course, that the CTR, for nearly all councils, I only know one council where CTR is more generous for universal credit applicants. Even the default scheme, you're less likely to get as much support under for CTR under universal credit because you retain higher, most people retain higher amount of earnings. So there is definitely, and there aren't the earnings disregards also, although some councils have introduced them, it is very localised, the impact is very localised, it'll depend on the scheme. But in general, as people move over to universal credit, they get less support on average. So that'll be the general trends, but it'll depend on the local schemes.
I think that's interesting. The council tax reduction take-up figures we still believe to be very low in the same sort of way that pension credit take-up figures are very low, and particularly skewed to homeowners not claiming CTR, while people who are renting and getting HB traditionally had that link between the two benefits that made them much more likely to get a CTR claim. And that may be one of the reasons, Zoe, what you're saying about the fact is that you've broken that direct link because you've moved housing support into UC, the rental support side of things, and that direct link, therefore, with the CTR claim has vanished.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I also think there may be too successful a publicity around universal credit rolling every benefit into one, in that actually a lot of people do believe it's all rolled into one, including council tax support, especially those who had passported and didn't really have that much to do with the council. They believe it's all just going to be rolled into one. So yeah, no, I have to say one of the things we got from and this won't be very popular, I know. So I apologise in advance, but one of the things we got from the Welsh research and the fieldwork was as council funding comes under pressure, and some of them perhaps became a bit more heavy-handed in enforcement. One of the reasons given by a lot of people for not claiming council tax support and was actually that they were scared of recovery action from councils. And I just think that's something to always bear in mind, that that is, and the thing is, these get a reputation, you know, things get a reputation, and word goes round that you've got to be a bit careful about this. And we were definitely seeing indications of that as well.
Mm.
Worrying. Are there any more questions or comments from our audience? I'm aware that the time has just gone 12:42. I'll go back to the PowerPoint slides. Let's see Gareth in space. Quite interesting. Quite a lot of changes. I mean, one thing that strikes me as well. I was looking around there, you know, as you do when you're at work looking for government contracts, and there was a spate of DWP contracts, literally for contractors, about 2 or 3 months ago, where the basic job description was to analyse their own internal systems to work out how they can transition people from legacy benefits into universal credit. And I think that'll be, as those teams bed in, that'll probably be something that the DWP will be working on in the background. That's, you know, literally going through all their various databases and going, oh look, we got somebody on housing benefit who's not had a change for X years. We'll possibly write them a letter saying they'd be much better off on universal credit, and see if we can sort of nudge them as opposed to, you know, manage migration. It's quite a bad reputation. Interesting to see what happens. Anyway, I think thank you all for coming along. We'll leave the rest, the naming and shaming that Malcolm's got on there for councillors for another session. Hopefully Malcolm will be back with us next week, fully recovered. I'd like to thank all the panellists and everybody who's taken part. And Nick will be uploading the video of this as soon as we can. But yeah, without much ado, I'd like to thank everyone. So I'll see you all next week, hopefully.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Right.
Thank you.